The story of Egypt, the rise and fall of Egypt. The river Nile was a kind friend, but occasionally it was a hard taskmaster. It taught the people who lived along its banks the noble art of teamwork. They depended upon each other to build their irrigation trenches and keep their dikes in repair. In this way, they learned how to get along with their neighbors, and their mutual benefit association quite easily developed into an organized state. Then one man grew more powerful than most of his neighbors, and he became the leader of the community, and their commander-in-chief. When the envious neighbors of Western Asia invaded the prosperous valley, in due course of time he became their king, and ruled all the land from the Mediterranean to the mountains of the west. But these political adventures of old pharaohs, the word meant the man who lived in the big house, rarely interested the patient and toilant peasant of the grain fields. Provided he was not obliged to pay more taxes to his king than he thought just, he accepted the rule of Pharaoh as he accepted the rule of mighty Osiris. It was different, however, when a foreign invader came and robbed him of his possessions. After 20 centuries of independent life, a savage Arab tribe of shepherds called the Hyksos attacked Egypt, and for 500 years they were the masters of the valleys of the Nile. They were highly unpopular, and great hate was also felt for the Hebrews, who came to the land of Goshen to find a shelter after their long wanderings through the desert, and who helped the foreign usurper by attacking as his tax gatherers and his civil servants. But shortly after the year 1700 BC, the people of Thebes began a revolution, and after a long struggle, the Hyksos were driven out of the country, and Egypt was free once more. 1,000 years later, when Assyria conquered all Western Asia, Egypt became part of the empire in Sardanapalus. In the 7th century BC, became once more an independent state which obeyed the rule of a king who lived in the city of Sais in the delta of the Nile. But in the year 525 BC, Cambyses, the king of the Persians, took possession of Egypt, and in the 4th century BC, when Persia was conquered by Alexander the Great, Egypt too became a Macedonian province. It regained a semblance of independence when one of Alexander's generals set himself up as king of a new Egyptian state and founded the dynasty of Ptolemies, who resided in the newly built city of Alexandria. Finally, in the year 89 BC, the Romans came. The last Egyptian queen, Cleopatra, tried her best to save the country. Her beauty and charm were more dangerous to the Roman generals than half a dozen Egyptian army corps. Twice she was successful in her attacks upon the hearts of her Roman conquerors. But in the year 30 BC, Augustus, the nephew and the heir of Caesar, landed in Alexandria. He did not share his uncle's admiration for the lovely princess. He destroyed her armies but spared her life, that he might make her march into triumph as part of the spoils of war. When Cleopatra heard of his plan, she killed herself by taking poison, and Egypt became a Roman province. Mesopotamia, the second center of Eastern civilization. I'm going to take you to the top of the highest pyramid. I'm going to ask you that you imagine yourself possessed of the eyes of a hawk. Way off in the distance, far beyond the yellow sands of the desert, you will see something green and shimmering. It is a valley situated between two rivers. It is the paradise of the Old Testament. It is a land of mystery and wonder which the Greeks called Mesopotamia, the country between two rivers. The name of the two rivers are the Euphrates, which the Babylonians called the Puratu, and the Tigris, which was known as the Dikalt. They begin their course amidst the snows of the mountains of Armenia, where Noah's arks found a resting place, and slowly they flow through the southern plain until they reach the muddy banks of the Persian Gulf. They perform a very useful service. They turn the arid region of Western Asia into a fertile garden. The valley of the Nile had attracted people because it had offered them food upon fairly easy terms. The land between two rivers was popular for the same reason. It was a country full of promise, and both the inhabitants of the northern mountains and the tribes which roamed through the southern deserts tried to claim the territory as their own and most exclusive possession. The constant rivalry between the two mountaineers and desert nomads led to endless warfare. Only the strongest and the bravest could hope to survive, and that will explain why Mesopotamia became the home of a very strong race of men who were capable of creating a civilization which was in every respect as important as that of Egypt. The Sumerians. The Sumerian nail writers, whose clay tablets tell us the story of Assyria and Babylonia. The Great Semitic Melting Pot. The 5th century was an age of great discoveries. Columbus tried to find a way to the island of Cathay and stumbled upon a new and unsuspected continent. An Austrian bishop equipped with an expedition, which was to travel eastward and find the home of the Grand Duke of Muscovy, a voyage which led to complete failure. For Moscow was not visited by Western men until a generation later. Meanwhile, a certain Venetian by the name of Barbeo had explored the ruins of Western Asia and had brought back reports of a most curious language which he had found carved in the rocks of the temples of Shiraz and engraved upon endless pieces of baked clay. But Europe was busy with many of the other things. It was not until the end of the 18th century that the first cuneiform inscriptions, so called because the letters were wedge-shaped and wedges called cunis in Latin, were brought to Europe by a Danish surveyor named Niebuhr. Then it took 30 years before a patient German schoolmaster by the name of Grotefend had deciphered the first 4 letters, the D-A, the R, the S-H, the name of the Persian king Darius. And another 20 years had to go by until a British officer, Henry Rawlinson, who found the famous inscription of Betuzin, gave us a workable key to the nail writing of Western Asia. Compared to the problems of deciphering these nail writings, the job of Camphelion had been an easy one. The Egyptians used pictures, but the Sumerians, the earliest inhabitants of Mesopotamia, who had hit upon the idea of scratching their words in tablets of clay, had discarded pictures entirely, had involved a system of V-shaped figures, which showed a little connection with the pictures out of which they had been developed. A few examples will show you what I mean. In the beginning, a star was drawn with a nail into a brick that looked as follows. This sign, however, was too cumbersome, and after a short while when the meaning of heaven was added to that of a star, the picture was simplified in this way, which made it even more of a puzzle. In the same way, an ox changed from this into this, and a fish changed from this to that. The sun was originally a plain circle, and became this. If we were using the Sumerian script today, we would make this look like that. The system of writing down our ideas looks rather complicated, but for more than 30 centuries it was used by the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and the Persians, and all the different races which forced their way into the Fertile Valley. The story of Mesopotamia is one of endless warfare and conquest. First, the Sumerians came from the north. They were a white people who had lived in the mountains. They had been accustomed to worship their gods on the top of hills. After they had entered the plain, they constructed artificial little hills on the top of which they built their altars. They did not know of how to build stairs, and they therefore surrounded their towers with sloping galleries. Our engineers have borrowed this idea. As you may see in our big railroad stations where ascending galleries lead from one floor to another, we may have borrowed other ideas from the Sumerians, but we do not know it. The Sumerians were entirely absorbed by those races that entered the Fertile Valley at a later date. Their towers, however, still stand amidst the ruins of Mesopotamia. The Jews saw them when they went into exile in the land of Babylon, and they called them Towers of Babylon, or Towers of Babel. In the 40th century before our era, the Sumerians had entered Mesopotamia. They were soon afterward overpowered by the Akkadians, one of the many tribes from the desert of Arabia who spoke a common dialect and who are known as the Semites, because in the olden days people believed them to be direct descendants of Shem, one of the 3 sons of Noah. 1,000 years later, the Akkadians were forced to submit to the rule of the Amorites, another Semitic desert tribe whose great king Hammurabi built himself a magnificent palace in the holy city of Babylon, and who gave his people a set of laws which made the Babylonian state the best administered empire of the ancient world. Next, the Hittites, whom you will also meet in the Old Testament, overran the fertile valley and destroyed whatever they could not carry away. They in turn were vanquished by the followers of the great desert god Ashur, who called themselves Assyrians, who made the city of Nineveh in the center of a vast and terrible empire which conquered all of Western Asia and Egypt, and gathered taxes from countless subject races until the end of the 7th century before the birth of Christ, when the Chaldeans, also a Semitic tribe, re-established Babylon and made that city the most important capital of the day. Nebuchadnezzar, the best known of their kings, encouraged the study of science, and our modern knowledge of astronomy and mathematics is all based upon certain first principles which were discovered by the Chaldeans. In the year 538 BC, a crude tribe of Persian shepherds invaded this old land and overthrew the empire of the Chaldeans. 200 years later, they in turn were overthrown by Alexander the Great, who turned a fertile valley in the old melting pot of so many Semitic races into a Greek province. Next came the Romans, and after the Romans the Turks, and Mesopotamia, the second center of a world civilization, became a vast wilderness, where huge mounds of earth told a story of ancient glory.